In April 2025, Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea forge a rogue axis through defense pacts, oil trades, and missile tech, defying Trump's nuclear ultimatum to Iran and maximum pressure sanctions. Russia's January pact with Iran, China's 90% Iranian oil imports, and North Korea's 2024 Russia deal, backed by March Gulf of Oman drills, challenge U.S. dominance, risking global markets and NATO's collapse. X posts warn of a new axis fueling nuclear fears and trade chaos. Why is this bloc rising, and what are the stakes? We'll unpack the news, background, and fallout in 6 steps, delivering raw truth for libertarian uncensored. No fluff, just facts to navigate this crisis. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. Axis Pacts and Drills Form. On January 17, 2025, Russia and Iran signed a 20-year strategic partnership in Moscow, expanding a 2001 agreement to include defense, trade, and energy cooperation, with joint military drills and $500 million in missile tech transfers. On June 19, 2024, North Korea and Russia sealed a mutual defense pact in Pyongyang, committing to aid if attacked, followed by North Korea's hypersonic missile tech exports to Iran, valued at $200 million. In March 2025, these nations, joined by China, conducted maritime security belt naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, deploying 20 ships, signaling defiance of Trump's March 3rd ultimatum. Iran must negotiate a nuclear deal by May 31st or face U.S. bombing. China's purchase of 1.4 million barrels daily of Iranian oil, 90% of its exports, defies U.S. sanctions, costing $2 billion yearly to enforce. These posts highlight Russia's Su-35 jet transfers to Iran, North Korea's tech aiding Tehran's missile cities, and China's $5 billion oil trade, branding it a rogue axis. Announced before Trump's inauguration, these moves counter April 1st U.S. sanctions on 50 Chinese and UAE firms tied to Iran's weapons network. The Axis's actions, including Iran's drone supplies for Russia's Ukraine war, challenge U.S. global influence, risking Middle East escalation and NATO fractures as allies hesitate and markets brace for turmoil, with Brent crude spiking to $90 in April. Chapter 2. U.S. Sanctions, Nuclear History. U.S. sanctions and nuclear disputes fuel this axis. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, curbed Iran's nuclear program for sanctions relief, backed by the U.S., Russia, China, and Europe, limiting uranium enrichment to 3.67%. Trump's 2018 withdrawal reimposed sanctions, slashing Iran's oil exports from 2.5 million to 800,000 barrels daily by 2020, cutting GDP 6%. Iran resumed enrichment, reaching 60% purity by 2024, a step from bomb grade, per UN reports. North Korea faced UN sanctions since 2006 for nuclear tests, losing $1 billion in trade yearly, with its Thor-50 warheads intact despite Trump's 2018-2019 summits with Kim Jong-un. Biden's 2021-2023 Iran talks failed, unable to guarantee U.S. commitment against future exits. Trump's 2025 maximum pressure targeted Iran's nuclear firms and China's refineries, with April 1st sanctions on 50 entities costing $2 billion to enforce. X posts note Iran and North Korea's distrust, viewing U.S. talks as traps to erode sovereignty. Since 2018, U.S. sanctions cost Iran $50 billion in oil revenue, while North Korea's trade losses fueled its 2024 Russia pact. This history of broken deals, sanctions since 2006 for North Korea and 2018 for Iran, and Trump's bombing threats drive these nations to unite with Russia and China, forming pacts and drills to counter U.S. dominance in 2025. Chapter 3. Axis Motives. The Axis's motives are economic survival and anti-U.S. defiance. Russia, sanctioned since its 2022 Ukraine invasion, lost $4 billion in U.S. trade by 2024, relying on Iran's 10,000 drones and North Korea's missiles, costing $500 million yearly for its war. Its January 2025 Iran pact secures more, with Russia supplying $500 million in nuclear tech and Arctic trade routes bypassing sanctions. Iran, hit by $50 billion in lost oil revenue since 2018, exports 1.4 million barrels daily, earning $5 billion from China to fund 60% uranium enrichment, costing $1 billion annually. North Korea, facing 4% GDP losses from 2006 UN sanctions, trades hypersonic tech to Iran for $200 million, gaining 500,000 barrels of Russian oil in 2024. China, countering Trump's 145% tariffs on its $400 billion U.S. trade surplus, buys Iran's oil at $10 below Brent's $90, saving $5 billion yearly to offset U.S. economic pressure. X posts warn of rogue unity as these nations defy UN sanctions and U.S. threats. For libertarians, this axis resists globalist control, exposing U.S. sanctions as economic theft that impoverishes nations while costing $2 billion to enforce. By uniting in trade, tech, and Gulf drills, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China challenge America's unipolar dominance, seeking sovereignty and economic stability against a U.S.-led order that prioritizes war profiteering over peace. Chapter 4. U.S. and Allies' Responses. The U.S. counters the Axis with sanctions and military posturing. On April 1, 2025, it sanctioned 50 Chinese and UAE firms linked to Iran's weapons network, costing $500 million in trade, and deployed B-52 bombers near Iran to signal potential strikes. South Korea invested $1 billion in missile shield upgrades to protect 28,000 U.S. troops, but Japan, 600 miles from North Korea's missiles, hesitates on military escalation, prioritizing $2 billion in naval drills. Europe, hit by Trump's 10% tariffs on $300 billion trade, faces internal rifts. France pushes EU autonomy, Turkey explores Russia's gas deals, and Germany's public, 59% fearing war per polls, opposes U.S. flyovers. X posts highlight U.S. isolation as allies waver. The U.S.'s April 3rd trilateral with Japan and South Korea reaffirmed denuclearization, but South Korea's protests demand no war. Libertarians slam U.S. bases, costing $5 billion yearly in South Korea, as provocations fueling Axis defiance, not security. The Pentagon's $886 billion 2024 budget, bloated by war contracts, underscores profiteering, while sanctions costing $2 billion to enforce unite foes like Russia, Iran, and North Korea. India, buying Iran's oil, remains neutral, weakening U.S. leverage. As NATO's $1.2 trillion budget strains allies, the Axis exploits divisions, betting on America's overstretch to resist Trump's threats and sanctions in a fracturing global order. Chapter 5. Global Fallout. The Axis's defiance disrupts global markets and alliances. Iran's 1.4 million barrels daily, 4% of global oil supply, stabilize prices, but U.S. sanctions risk disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of crude flows, pushing Brent crude to $90 in April 2025. Europe's refineries cut output 3%, with Germany's industrial production down 2%. India and Angola, buying Iran's oil, bypass U.S. sanctions, costing $1 billion in enforcement. The S&P 500 dropped 5%, and U.S. gas prices rose 8%, adding $200 yearly per driver per trade data. These posts warn of an energy crisis. In Asia, South Korea's $5 billion dispute over U.S. base costs frays ties, while Japan's $2 billion naval drills signal fear of North Korea's missiles. India's $3 billion missile defense upgrades eye the axis, echoing TSMC's chip supply woes from U.S. tariffs. NATO's $1.2 trillion 2025 budget faces scrutiny as France and Turkey drift, mirroring Serbia's Russian-backed unrest. Libertarians argue U.S. sanctions and bases provoke chaos, not control, inflating Pentagon profits while hurting allies and consumers. The Axis's oil trades and tech transfers, like Gaza's Red Sea blockades, amplify supply chain fears, risking a global economic downturn. If Trump's threats lead to strikes, escalation could destabilize Asia and the Middle East, with markets and alliances buckling under the strain. Chapter 6. Libertarian Truth and Outlook. The Russia-Iran-China-North Korea axis, defying Trump's 2025 ultimatum and sanctions, exposes U.S. maximum pressure as a globalist failure. Russia's $500 million tech transfers, China's $5 billion oil buys, and North Korea's $200 million missile deals fuel Iran's 60% uranium enrichment, countering $2 billion in U.S. sanctions that raise gas prices 8% and tank markets 5%. The X posts fear a nuclear spiral as Iran's May 31st deadline nears, with Oman talks faltering over U.S. refusal to lift sanctions. Libertarians know sanctions rob the poor, bases provoke defiance, and the Pentagon's $886 billion 2024 budget enriches war profiteers, not citizens. NATO's $1.2 trillion spending, strained by France's autonomy push and Turkey's Russian ties, risks collapse, like Serbia's unrest. The Axis's Gulf drills and trade, echoing TSMC's tariff-driven chip woes, challenge U.S. control, uniting rogues against a unipolar order. If Trump strikes Iran, Russia and North Korea may escalate, risking Asia-Pacific war with 28,000 U.S. troops exposed. A deal seems unlikely. Iran demands sanctions relief. Trump offers threats. Libertarians demand non-intervention, seeing U.S. policy as chaos, not peace. The Axis's rise signals a multipolar shift, but escalation looms. Will Trump's threats spark war or force a retreat? The stakes are global, the cost American. Share your take below. Subscribe to Libertarian Uncensored for unfiltered truth on this fracturing world order. The Russia-Iran-China-North Korea axis defies Trump's nuclear threats and sanctions, risking war and market collapse. X posts fear chaos as U.S. policy fuels defiance, not peace. Sanctions hurt Americans, war budgets soar. Will this bloc topple U.S. control or spark global peril? Share your take below. Subscribe to Libertarian Uncensored for raw truth on power shifts shaking your world.